Forest fires,
floods,
hurricanes,
drought.
These words have become the soundtrack to an issue headlining news streams and media outlets across the world.
Take the bus.
Recycle.
Turn off the lights.
Compost.
These phrases have become the beat to which we march in our everlasting campaign to save the planet.
We're talking about climate change, of course. And while these issues and solutions are important to acknowledge and act upon, there's a whole nother side of the story that often doesn't get the spotlight in environmental conversations: the issue of gender.
To put it simply, climate change is sexist.
Climate change impacts everyone, yet women ultimately bear the greatest burden. This is because women and girls worldwide face gender inequality. Inequalities such as the gaps in education, civil rights, or wages place women in a more vulnerable position and can cause them to fall into a cycle of poverty. In fact, 70% of the world's poor are women and girls.
To put it simply, gender inequality leads to poverty and vulnerability. And those who live in poverty and vulnerability are the hardest hit by climate change. Let's break it down. There are two main reasons that women, particularly women in poverty, are the most affected by climate change. The first reason is that women and girls feel the impacts of natural disaster much more severely as a direct result of the inequalities they face before the disaster strikes.
For example, girls are less likely to be taught life-saving techniques such as swimming or climbing.
In fact, according to the United Nations, women and children are 14 times more likely to die in the event of a natural disaster than men. Even the death tolls are sexist.
And the second reason, climate change only increases the inequalities that women and girls are already subjected to. For example, in times of economic crisis caused by climate-related disasters, child marriage becomes much more common, as dowries provide a much-needed source of income for the families, and marrying off a daughter means just one less mouth to feed.
Girls are also far more likely to be taken out of school to fetch water during a drought. And unfortunately, after climate-related disasters hit, the rates of gender and sexual-based violence only increase. To sum it up, women around the world face gender inequality. These inequalities make women and girls more vulnerable, and it is those who are most vulnerable who are the hardest hit by climate change. And when climate change does hit, it increases the inequalities that women around the world already face.
There's just so much to the issue of climate change that we simply don't see in the media or in our own lives.
Take a look at this picture of a group of women at a camp in Mogadishu, Somalia. What you can't see in this photo is the climate-induced drought these women have left behind.
You can't see the suffering they felt as they waited for the rain to come, or the hunger they felt when it never did.
You can't see the conflict caused by climate disasters, and you can't see the 21.5 million people displaced every year by climate change.
You can't see the fact that 80% of climate refugees are women and girls.
Climate change not only places a heavier weight upon the shoulders of women, but also widens the pre-existing gap in gender equality and actually limits our ability to fight the climate crisis. But wait a minute. Why do we care about this? Why does this issue, the issue of climate change, matter most to us?
Because we're 17. Because this is our future. We should be worrying about grades, graduation, our future careers, and making naive wedding boards on Pinterest.
It's easy to forget the steady threat of climate change in our everyday lives. We all have things to do, people to meet, and places to go.
But whether we like it or not, we care about it because climate change is our future. Yeah, we can deny it, or ignore it, or delay it, or we can try to solve it.
And for a problem this big, bigger than any one or two individuals, we need the unconventional solutions. We need solutions that educate, that inspire, that involve everyone. We need solutions that empower.
We can't solve climate change if 51% of us don't have the same rights or opportunities.
To solve a problem this big, we need everyone's help.
So, we are left with these two issues that both require our immediate attention and action: climate change and gender inequality.
Which do we choose?
Do we abandon the ongoing crisis that leaves half of the human population with fewer fundamental human rights than the other?
Or do we disregard the looming threat of catastrophic global disaster that is caused by our inaction?
How do we turn a blind eye to one issue and not the other?
Luckily, we don't have to choose.
There is a solution that can target climate change and gender inequality. The solution is female empowerment.
One of the best ways to accomplish female empowerment and carbon reduction is through girls' education. 62 million girls around the world are out of school, missing out on a fundamental human right, while also making them more vulnerable to climate change.
Sending girls to school allows them to lead more empowered lives, actively manage their reproductive options by planning their families, and can cause them to escape the cycle of poverty. Girls who go to school are more likely to have fewer, healthier children, which reduces population growth.
This decrease in population growth, a side product of female education, actually helps curb climate change because the two trends have an undeniable relationship. Take a look at this graph. The less the blue line, the population line, goes up, the less the black line, the carbon emissions line, goes up. Of course, there are other factors that come into play, but overall it's pretty simple.
In fact, according to Paul Hawken's Project Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to solve climate change. The combination of universal education and family planning is the #1 solution to help mitigate our climate crisis.
108 trillion, 136 billion, 421 million kilograms of carbon. That's a pretty big number, right? In weight, it's equal to about 1.2 billion passenger airplanes. According to Project Drawdown, it's the amount of carbon we could reduce from our atmosphere in the next 30 years through girls' education and family planning.
Although girls' education and family planning is most needed in developing countries, women around the world need access to reproductive health care and educational resources. But education isn't the only part of the solution. Women who have already received education need a different set of tools in order to be empowered and to help mitigate our climate crisis.
We can't expect to make any real progress in solving climate change if half of us aren't given the same opportunities or are underrepresented in positions of power. Take a look at this photo from last year's G20 summit, a meeting of some of the most influential leaders in the world. Now, let's play a game called Spot the Woman. Oh yeah, there they are, all 4 of them. Giving women an equal playing field isn't about filling a quota or giving out freebies, but about recognizing that there are underlying discrepancies that can hold a woman back in her career, preventing her from contributing valuable ideas towards the solution, and preventing governments and businesses alike from making well-rounded and successful environmental decisions.
In fact, studies show that countries with a higher number of women representatives in their governments are more likely to follow through with environmental agreements. When only a certain demographic is represented in these high-ranked positions of power, little environmental progress is achieved. And for the most part, this common demographic is male, pale, and a little stale.
We said earlier that climate change is sexist, and it still is, but there is so much more to that story.
Women aren't simply the victims of climate change. We're the solutions too. We are innovators, daughters, mothers, entrepreneurs, community members, scientists, leaders, CEOs, students, sisters, engineers, friends. When we are empowered and equal, we all have the ability to solve a problem as big as climate change.
So what can you do? We all need to come together and support each other, and support the females in our lives. Support girls who want to go into scientific and technological fields.
Spread awareness of the gender issue in discussions about climate change.
Lift up women in government and in business.
Stand up for women's rights.
Advocate for girls' education and all the benefits that come along with it.
After all, we may be fighting for the equal rights of women and girls worldwide. We may be fighting for our right to a clean and healthy planet, but really, we're fighting for all of us and for our future.
Climate change may have the greatest effect on women and girls, but it is women and girls who can have the greatest effect on climate change. Thank you.
Bye.